When Age of Calamity was initially revealed, based on the trailer footage used and Eiji Aonuma's wording, this game looked and sounded like a very canonical story that took place during the Battle of the Great Calamity itself, a fundamental portion of Breath of the Wild's history that we never got to fully experience for ourselves. As more and more information was released, it became pretty clear that something wasn't quite right, and that everyone's hastily assumed canonicity of Age of Calamity may have been a big old oopsie daisy. The introduction of a miniature time-traveling egg-shaped guardian who was on a mission to save Hyrule by changing the past quickly placed all eyes on Aonuma for clarity, and the man simply shrugged. To his credit, he never did officially say that the game was canon, only that it was a story that told the events of the Great Calamity, and thus the game was quickly abandoned and disregarded by a large chunk of the Zelda fanbase because the sentiment, "what's the point of theorizing about a Zelda game if it isn't even canon?" prevailed in most people's thoughts. But what if I told you that this game actually is, or at least should, be canon? By the end of this video, you might find yourself quite surprised by my final conclusion, as a lot of information about Age of Calamity's story has either been misunderstood, or the very fine details have simply flown under a lot of people's radar, which is understandable. Age of Calamity's gameplay is not for everyone, so it's fair to assume that much of this game's fantastic lore has unfortunately fallen into the void rather than onto all of our plates for everyone to enjoy. And that is exactly why I'm here today, to go over all of the details of Age of Calamity's story that I think just might earn it the highly coveted status of officially canon within the Zelda franchise. A lot of the arguments that I still frequently see in opposition to Age of Calamity being canon is the way time traveling is handled and its effects on the story of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. For example, if Link never collapsed during the Battle of Fort Hateno and never needed to be placed under a 100-year-long recovery period, then Breath of the Wild would have never happened. Pretty much the entire story of Age of Calamity is filled to the brim with contradictions and small stuff like this that makes it completely incompatible and disconnected from Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom stories, which is exactly why there are so many arguments against the canonicity of Age of Calamity of this kind, and to this very day. However, there's one extremely crucial piece of information that I see a lot of these arguments sorely lacking, and that's the elusive fact that the world in which Age of Calamity takes place in is actually not the same world that Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom take place in. Age of Calamity isn't just a game that's 100 years ago in Breath of the Wild's past. No. Age of Calamity is a completely different world with its own unique past. Although it is heavily implied that during this particular scene in which Terrako awakens in Zelda's tower, we're led to believe that we are currently in the same world as the official Breath of the Wild game, but that actually isn't the case at all, far from it. At this exact moment, we are already in the world and timeline of Age of Calamity, not Breath of the Wild's. In fact, we never even once cross paths in any way with Breath of the Wild's timeline throughout the game. Don't believe me? Well, let's quickly go over every major historical difference between these two worlds, and you'll see what I mean. First off, in Age of Calamity, we have a version of Link who has never pulled the Master Sword, and only does so for the very first time right before officially becoming the 5th champion. In Breath of the Wild, Link officially pulled the Master Sword when he was around 12 to 13 years old, and he kept the blade in his possession for many years while going through his training as a knight. These two events are the polar opposites of each other, seeing as Link was the last champion to be confirmed in Age of Calamity, while in Breath of the Wild, everyone kind of just knew that Link was going to become one for several years. This huge discrepancy between these two games right off the bat was entirely unaffected by Terrako's meddling in the past, since all of this took place before Terrako even arrived in the past, so you know that something very fundamental is already different about Age of Calamity's world in comparison to Breath of the Wild's. Next, we have the reason for why Link became Zelda's appointed knight in Age of Calamity, which was simply just due to his impressive display of combat prowess, catching the Eye of King Rhoam during an attempted enemy siege on Hyrule Castle. Literally the very first mission in the game, and before a single champion had even been confirmed yet. In Breath of the Wild, Link becomes Zelda's appointed knight only after every champion of the 4 divine beasts have been confirmed. While running tests on a guardian, it suddenly went rogue and started firing off laser beams, which prompted Link to deflect one of them with a pot lid, destroying the rampaging guardian with its own attack. This is what finally caught the eye of King Rhoam, and is also the reason why he became Zelda's appointed knight in Breath of the Wild. In Breath of the Wild's Champions Ballad DLC memory cutscenes, we get to see Zelda on her journey to recruit the 4 champions of the divine beasts, and Link is nowhere nowhere to be seen. But in Age of Calamity, Link actually does accompany Zelda during the entire journey from the very beginning. As you can see, we're dealing with two very different timelines that simply do not track with each other in the slightest, and in fact are almost the exact opposites of each other. Finally, we have the most important detail of all that confirms without a doubt that these two games do not share the same world or even the same timeline of events. Take a closer look at the time portal that Terrako opens at the beginning of the game. This Sheikah text translates into Gate of Time, meaning Terrako isn't traveling to a different dimension, a parallel world, or even an alternate reality or branching timeline path. Terrako is traveling directly to this world's past, not Breath of the Wild's. You see, time travel does work in the Zelda series, but only once you fully understand how it's being used. It can and does sometimes vary from game to game, but the basics that do apply to Age of Calamity are essentially as follows. Time itself is generally linear, but under certain circumstances, time can become chaotic. All presents have their own unique pasts and futures that progress naturally in a straight line, but when you unnaturally travel directly to the past or the future, unless you're utilizing a persistent connection between the two time periods to do so, you are not traveling to your original timeline's past or future. Instead, you're traveling to a different timeline's past or future. A persistent connection between two time periods allows for the direct passage between the past and the future, such as the Master Sword in Ocarina of Time. The conditions to wield the blade requires Link to be 17 years old, so when you relinquish it, you return to being 10 years old, with the blade itself acting as a waypoint. Up until you defeat Ganondorf, this future was part of your original timeline, due to the Master Sword maintaining a natural persistent connection between the future and the past. But when Zelda unnaturally sends you back in time with the Ocarina of Time, this breaks that connection, which sends you back to a completely different past and present with a brand new future, the child timeline. In the future you just came from, the adult timeline has just been created as a result of your unnatural departure from that time period, along with a new present and past timeline of events that correlates with that future. Another example of natural time traveling while utilizing a persistent connection between two time periods can be seen in Skyward Sword with the Tree of Life. Due to the Gate of Time in the center of the room acting as a waypoint, you're able to affect the present and the future by planting a seed in the past, making a fully grown Tree of Life appear in the present. Age of Calamity Yunobo confirms in a cutscene that they all came from a future very similar to Breath of the Wild's post-game time period. But keep in mind, Terrako came from a future where nearly the same events more than likely occurred as suggested by this scene that happens identically in both games. So they didn't come from Breath of the Wild. They came from Age of Calamity's future, this scene in particular's future. But now that Terrako no longer exists in the future due to traveling to the past, shouldn't the connection between the past and the future be severed? If you said yes, you'd be correct. But then how did Terrako still manage to connect to the future and summon the 4 future champions? If you've played Breath of the Wild, then the answer should already be familiar to you. Through Zelda distilling information into Terrako, boosting his abilities by way of sacred energy and a dash of time magic on the side, since now we know that Zelda is naturally more in tune with her time magic genetics from Tears of the Kingdom. We also know that Zelda's tears themselves can have some pretty wild effects on time itself, with glyphs not existing at all in Breath of the Wild, but according to the ancient Hylians in Tears of the Kingdom, the glyphs have very visibly existed for thousands of years. Apparently, with enough sacred energy, Zelda's tears can become so strong that they can even rewrite history. So is it really that much of a stretch to believe that in this moment, Zelda's tears temporarily created a bridge between the old future and the new past? Oh, and there's one more thing. Age of Calamity Link canonically uses a shield in every single cutscene, while in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, Link canonically does not use a shield in any of the memory cutscenes at all, meaning there's a pretty big personal preference difference between these two Links that makes them stand apart from each other. Oh, and remember that cutscene that I mentioned earlier where Yunobo talks about the time period that he came from? Well, during that cutscene, a flashback occurs that specifically shows his future version of Link wearing a shield. So I don't know about you and all that time travel mumbo jumbo, but this is the proof that I needed that Age of Calamity is its own thing. After hearing all of this, I hope now you can finally see that there's no real reason why Age of Calamity shouldn't be considered a canon game. For all we know, the future of Age of Calamity could still very well lead us into Age of Imprisonment, since at the end of Age of Calamity, we do defeat Calamity Ganon, sure, but good old Ganondorf himself is still stewing away down there beneath Hyrule Castle. So the danger is far from over. With Age of Imprisonment being confirmed this time around as a canonical title, it makes you wonder whether or not they mean it's canonical to Tears of the Kingdom or to Age of Calamity. I guess only time will tell. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed yourself, subscribe and stick around for another bite of Zelda lore from Gossipgeist.